everybody, thank you so much for joining me for another episode of 10 Minute Tuesday. If you haven't already, please like, share, and subscribe. In today's episode, I got my guy Dustin in the building. Dustin, what's going on, bro?
Hey, Sekou, great to be with you.
Oh, man. Likewise, man. Thank you so much for having me. Well, you being on my podcast and having me on your podcast. So, Man, I can't wait to dive into this, man.
Yeah, for sure. Likewise. Cool. Yeah, it wasn't long ago that you were on mine, so I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, of course. So we've done a number of these, man. Dustin, go ahead and introduce yourself to the people.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so Dustin Schimek, currently Enterprise Analytics Manager at MedStar Health, focusing on data fluency and leading our analytics community of practice there. We have around 780, 790 folks in our analytics community of practice. So just an absolute honor to get to lead that group.
I mean, that's a number of people, like 700 plus people all doing things, doing some creative stuff and doing some amazing things. But before you got to that point, you had to get started. So what really compels you to get into data to begin with?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've always been interested in data. You know, it goes back to when I was a kid. I would help on my old computer, the first computer I had, I would help my dad with projects, doing financial analysis and things like that. And I was always drawn to that, but I've always been pretty entrepreneurial, kind of like yourself. I always have kind of side projects going on and, I have my own podcast and things like this. And data just became an area where I feel like there was a lot of just like entrepreneurial projects that I could tackle with my data skills. And I really always liked that dynamic to it as well.
So entrepreneur, data, doing a number of things, financial analytics, but then you had jobs before you even got to this one. So thinking about where your start is, and I like to ask this, like in high school, I was a movie salesperson, or I did popcorn or whatever, right? Thinking about this, what's been your least favorite job to date and why'd you dislike it?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's and it's funny, before the podcast today, I showed my kids the questions you were going to ask, and they were like, "What are you going to say for that one?" That was the one that they were drawn to. But it's funny. I liked my first few jobs. Like I said, always have been pretty entrepreneurial, and I worked in a retail store and a convenience store for my first jobs, and I actually really enjoyed that. I liked selling things, and I think actually that's again part of the reason why I like data. I liked monitoring all those transactions and seeing how they added up over time and things like that. But least favorite, I think it's hard to point to a specific company or organization or role. I think what I would point to is where I think that it's been a little bit harder to maybe be motivated is when I wasn't totally aligned with the leader that I was working under. I've been fortunate to work for some great leaders, and you kind of get spoiled with that, right? When you work for great leaders, like the impact you can make is like order of magnitude higher, right? And so I would say maybe the only negative experience has been maybe if I was working with a leader, for a period of time that I wasn't super aligned with.
Yeah, that's always been like the hardest part of different roles, because sometimes the work itself isn't necessarily awful. It's just like the leadership, and then sometimes feeling like you're on an island trying to figure things out, and the direction and just some of the, like, I think we're both in entrepreneur, mindset. So the gray area doesn't necessarily bother us, right? We can live in a gray area, but it's just like when there's like not support or clear direction or whatever, that's where it gets really frustrating.
Totally. Yep. Agreed fully.
All right. So we have a philosophy on here called failing forward, right? So nothing you ever do, you ever fail, you just learn from it. So think about that in context. What's been your biggest failure, and what did you really learn from that experience?
Yeah, that's a great question. I thought long and hard about this one because it's been 12 or 13 years now that I've been in the field. There's definitely been a lot of failures along the way. Fortunately offset by some good successes. But I think the biggest thing for me is that as I've had the opportunity to grow an analytics program at an organization and be part of growing new analytics initiatives at a couple different organizations. And I think a lesson learned for me is that I always wanted to kind of like implement the absolute best in class of whatever I'm doing. Like I always want like everyone to buy into the value of it, and I want it to be perfect and things like this. And when I look back, I think there was a lot of projects that we had success with where there was really good things we did. We leveraged our strength, myself and my team did. And I think I should have continued to kind of build on those wins and build on those strengths and not dwell on what I'm not getting and not, kind of slip into a negative mindset of like, oh gosh, I wish we did this, but I want to do this, this, and this, well, you could probably make a lot of impact in the areas that you're already doing well in. And so I think it would just be more, don't get caught up in what you can't do, make sure that you're taking a moment to step back, celebrate what you're doing well, and then double down on some of those strengths and things that you're doing well.
Dude, that's like fantastic advice, because I feel like as a society and just human beings, people who continuously improving, you look at the things that you did bad. Like, forget all of this 80% that came natural and we good and excelled at. It's like, oh man, here's a 20% where I really need to hone in on and get to and work at, where it could be easier just to expand and continue, like I said, double down on the things that you're already accelerating at, do really good at it without being mindful. Like, I think about that. So I guess a follow-up question to that, and it's not so much podcast related, but like, have you ever taken the Strength Finders test?
So I've done like Myers-Briggs, and I've done the DISC assessment. I think I did Enneagram as well. My wife's actually having lunch next to me. I think she got me into that one. But Strength Finder specifically, I don't know if it's different than any of those. I
think philosophically they're saying, right, you take these questions and then it highlights the things that you're really good at. And like, I think the reason I'm thinking of this, because it was pivotal for like me and some of even my friends. It was just like one of those things where, all right, after this exam, it was like, oh, we're really good at this. Maybe we should focus on this. Oh, you're good at data. Like, you focus on the things you're really good at. So hearing you say that, even from a big organization, made me think about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's really cool. All right, so thinking about the lessons and stuff that we have. So we talked about our biggest failure, but what's one lesson your job has taught you that you think everyone should learn at some point?
Yeah, I think and especially this is true. I mean, it's true in any profession, but especially right now in data, there's so many things that you could focus on. There's so many hard skills you could focus on. There's so much written out there, on social media or LinkedIn about what you should focus on from a soft skill development perspective, things like that. I would think about like, what are the things that you're really good at and how can you use those skills to make a big impact in your role in your organization right now, and kind of take a little bit of an entrepreneurial approach with it, for those strengths that you have. Where is there an opportunity in the scope of your job or your team or your organization where you could do something with those skills that would make a big impact or potentially transformative impact for your team and organization? And, double down on that, go after it, apply just maybe a little bit extra effort to deliver something incrementally using your skills. And I think you'd be surprised the doors that open from that. There's an awful lot of things that I'm not good at, and that there's a lot of weaknesses folks have, but I think it's going back to that thing I was mentioning earlier, like, don't necessarily dwell on those. We should always try to get better at our weaknesses. We should always try to expand our skill sets, but leverage your strengths for sure, and see if there's a way to leverage your strengths in a way that adds some incremental value to your team or organization. And I think that, you'd be surprised how much is forgiven in terms of weaknesses that you have if you double down on those strengths and deliver real incremental value from projects that leverage your strengths.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And I think it's refreshing from my lens, right? So I'm technically an entrepreneur running my own thing, but hearing you, someone who's running an organization, to still embrace that entrepreneur mindset, even though you're working for an organization, like, I think people need to hear more of that.
Yeah, for sure. Yep. Cool. Yep. And definitely working within an organization. If anyone's listening from MedStar, I don't claim to be running MedStar. within, yes. So within. Yes, just wanted to emphasize that.
Great point. All right. So the target audience for my podcast are people who are just getting into data, people who might be pivoting into data, or just like randomly found me on an algorithm or something. So thinking about that, what's one piece of advice you give someone who's just starting out in their data career?
Just starting out. Yeah, it's a great question. I think focus on learning some of the core skills. I mean, if you look at, there's a number of assessments that have been put out there. I've put out a jobs report myself. I used to do it quarterly, now doing it annually. But if you look at the top skills, the top hard skills that are needed for kind of entry to mid-level data analytics roles, there's a long tail of skills that are listed out on some positions, but they're really, at the end of the day, there's the 80-20 rule applied. Some of the core skills tend to be mentioned over and over and over and over again across a number of job postings, right? SQL, learning your basic data viz tools, Tableau and Power BI, maybe picking up a little bit of Python, but getting those core hard skills down. And then I would say focusing on just, getting comfortable with presenting. It's something that I recognize a lot of folks aren't going to go too deep into, but just building up your comfort with it, saying yes to some opportunities to speak. And, there's a science aspect to it too. It's art and science, but you can learn to be a better speaker. And I think perhaps, joining a Toastmasters or, organization where you can practice speaking would be really good for one's career, even early on.
Wow, that's like fantastic advice. Like everything you're saying is spot on. Like the core, every single job description for data analysts is Excel, SQL, BI tool, client facing, problem solving, analytical mindset, right? It's all the core components what people are looking for. So it's spot on. And then great advice on like public speaking. I think that's an underrated skill that people don't talk about often that can help you out even outside of data. Like the more comfortable you are speaking and presenting, the further it can take you along in your career.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think that one is really, you can get far without it, but that one really pours gas on the career trajectory. Not only the trajectory, but just the opportunities that get opened up. Like there's breadth and depth, and I would say that the breadth of opportunities opens up when you get a little bit more comfortable with speaking. You don't have to be perfect, but just comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. Even if you're uncomfortable, just do it. Like, just get out there.
Yeah, just do it. Right. Yeah. I mean, most people are not 100% comfortable.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. All right, Dustin, tell me about the most influential people in your life and how they made an impact on you.
Yeah, these are really good questions. And they made me think pretty deeply. So I appreciate that. A couple that come to mind, and there's a theme between them, and that is folks that were able to kind of come back or transition, pretty significantly in their lives and careers. I think people love a comeback story. I do myself, and I always admire people that do a really good job of that. I actually had growing up, there was a pastor of my church who actually, he had been in like a totally different profession for like the first like 45 or 50 years of his life. And then like had this huge change in his life, became a pastor, and he was like this amazing pastor that I had growing up. And I was always like, wow, like I couldn't even think of this guy as being anything but a pastor, but he had this like totally other life that he kind of pivoted from, which was really interesting to me. And so that was always like something that stuck with me, that like, wow, like someone like in the middle of their life, like age 45 or 50 could completely change directions from one career to another, and just totally different, like subject matter expert and like demeanor and things like that. And that was pretty cool. And I look at that today in terms of our field, that same phenomenon. We have someone, just as an example, and I know there's a number of folks that have done things like this, but I'm always inspired by this. And this really keeps me going, especially as I get, kind of into middle age myself, is like, we had someone just join our team at MedStar who was in a very clinical role for the better part of their career. Won't mention their name, but they started doing pretty heavy data and data science work on the side, and using those projects that they were creating to help their area while they were still in a clinical role, and then now have moved into a formal analytics role, but carry with them all of this expertise that they have,
domain knowledge, everything.
Yeah. And so it's like, wow, like not only did they pivot, but also how valuable are they carrying all of that domain knowledge, right, along with some of these very hard skills that they have in data. And so folks that are able to do that, I think it's really cool, because like there's so much, and I feel this way myself sometimes, right? Like, oh, like like if you don't do this or that, are you going to have no opportunities or whatever? And I don't think that's the case at all, So those things inspire me.
Wow. Love that, man. Shout out to Pastor coming in,
Yes.
doing something earlier, but it came in, dropping spiritual bombs, man, out here.
Right,
and
exactly.
And then shout out to the clinician. And like, I think especially, you're in the healthcare space, so I'm sure you're probably seeing this a little bit more, but there's so many people that are migrating from the field to more of the analytic roles. And they're such a valuable asset because they understand some of the nuances and some of the stuff out there from the processes of how does data capture, how this is that, right? And that's just invaluable.
Right.
So,
totally. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, Dustin, where can listeners find you at online?
Yeah, for sure. So you can find me on LinkedIn, always there. If you reach out with, I get a lot of interesting messages, but I can say if you reach out to me with a sincere message, wanting to know about something, I almost always will respond. If it's not a solicitation of some kind, but LinkedIn, and then also the Data Ideas podcast. I do a weekly podcast episode, which you can actually find. A few weeks ago, Sekou was on one of the episodes there.
Awesome. Check out his content. Follow him on LinkedIn. I'm going to talk him into getting a YouTube page at some point. We'll see. We get it up and running. But, man, Dustin, appreciate you being on today.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Sekou.
Hey, have a great one. And as I said in the beginning, if you haven't already, please like, share, and subscribe. And we'll talk to y'all next week. Have a great day.